This is our Simondon reading group. We're continuing our reading of Imagination and Invention. We are at page 139 of the translation, so we're picking up from the beginning of part 4 on invention. So this is the last part of the book, aside from a short conclusion. So again, as a sort of big picture recap, there's this general cycle of the image that Simondon is presenting. So starting from the image in the encounter with the object, the sort of present image, and then you have the starting with the anticipation of the object, so the image before the encounter with the object, and then the image of the future, I guess, and then passing to the image in the encounter with the object in the present, and then the third part is the image after the encounter with the object, so memory or various phenomena that are related to memory. And then finally, the last phase is invention, and invention sort of starts the whole cycle at a new level. So it sort of changes gear is the sort of idea or the image that I have used before. So last time we read the part. So in part 3, the last subsection was on the symbol object. So that's what we looked at last time, and so there's a variety of different phenomena that you can sort of describe as symbols. And we talked about how Simondon has this sort of peculiar use of the word symbol that he introduces in a number of other places that we've read in Individuation, for example, where he refers back to this ancient Greek practice of taking a stone or something and breaking it in half and using the two pieces as a token, so that people can recognize the two parts of the two sides of a relationship. So in the host-guest relationship, for example, the host's family and the guest's family would keep these tokens, and their descendants could recognize each other by seeing how the two pieces fit together. And those two pieces were called symbolon, or symbola in the plural. So Simondon generally, when he uses the term symbol, he is referring to this type of relationship between these two elements of reality or two aspects of reality that fit together in some way that they're sort of complementary to each other. But here in part 3, or in this subsection on memory or on the symbol object, he's using the word symbol in more of a sort of traditional sense. So here he's talking about entities that sort of refer to something beyond themselves, or they point to something beyond themselves. So one of the first instances that he brings up is souvenirs. And so in French you have the word souvenir, which has the meaning of a souvenir, like an object that you bring back from a vacation or whatever, but also of memory or recollection. So like this object is literally serving as the sort of kernel around which a memory is formed. And so he talks about how when Lindbergh, who made the first transatlantic flight, lands in Paris, the crowd rushes forward and starts like ripping off pieces of the airplane to sort of take home as a souvenir. So like this historic event, this sort of great achievement is kind of incarnated in this piece of metal or fabric or whatever it is that is taken off the plane. So there's like this power, this sort of force of this event is kind of concentrated into this souvenir. So this piece of metal or whatever serves as a symbol because it sort of contains the power of everything that goes into that event, sort of concentrated into this one small object. And then he talks about how people want to buy clothes or other things that belonged to celebrities. And you still see this today. This is not it's not sort of restricted to 1960s France. This is a sort of generalized phenomenon, and probably even more powerful today than it was when he was writing. So these sort of mementos, like from a concert or I don't know, an actor, a movie star. So these sort of things that sort of capture or are imbued with the power of the famous person are sort of the symbol objects that he starts with, and he connects this with. We talked about this last time. He connects this with the idea that he develops more in on the mode of existence of technical objects of this magical relation to the world, or this magical mode of existence. And what the magical mode of existence consists in is this sort of network of notable places or remarkable places or places that concentrate the power of a whole region. So he talks about how the peak of a mountain is sort of like the center of the mountain of a mountainous region, not in the sense that it's like located in the middle, but in the sense that all of the sort of magical power of the mountain region is concentrated in that one peak. And there's also these key moments in time, in the way that the new year or the full moon or anniversaries of some kind of concentrate the power of a whole portion of the year. So then, like, even when you think of sort of magical ceremonies, you don't just do a ceremony in, I don't know, your backyard at noon or like in the middle of the day or whatever. You have to do the ceremony in a particular place that has this power and at a particular time, under the full moon or whatever. So you have to sort of orient your behavior towards the network of places and times that concentrate the power of the world. And so that's what these symbol objects do. And then he also talks about how various forms of adornment can serve as symbol objects. So things like, of course, clothing, but wigs, colored fingernails, jewelry, etc. So these are again sort of connected to the person. A person's clothes are sort of part of how that person presents themselves to the world. And so they're sort of personal to that person. And then the next sort of stage of a more externalized symbol object is when he talks about the scepter of an emperor or the weapons of a soldier. So these are symbols of the power. Like the scepter is a symbol of the power of the emperor, but it has this sort of more external nature in that it's something that anyone could potentially grasp, even if it's like prohibited for others than the emperor to grasp the scepter. Anyone could, in principle, pick it up and wield the power of the emperor by using this scepter. And then we go through this sort of more abstract discussion of the relationship between symbols and objects as such. So an object in the sort of psychological sense is an entity that is kind of purely observed. So it doesn't have any affective charge for the subject. So you just sort of, I don't know, you're walking in the woods, you see a tree, and it's not a particularly beautiful tree or a particularly ugly tree. It's not like actively impeding your progress. It's just sort of there. You just sort of notice it. It's like, like in Heidegger's terms, it's present at hand. It doesn't have any sort of connection to anything that you're, trying to do at the moment. And so this is an object in the psychological sense. And then a symbol has a similar kind of neutrality, but in a different way. So it's not that the symbol has no affective resonance. Instead, it has a sort of tension of a tense equilibrium of affective charge. So it's something that can be directed against me, like a weapon can be used to threaten me. But at the same time, that weapon I can pick it up and use it to threaten someone else. So there's a sort of two opposed directions of the affective charge of this weapon. And so the weapon as a symbol is sort of balanced between these two directions. And so this is, how a symbol differs from an object as such. Yeah, so I think that's like the main points of what we saw last time. Yeah, was there anything else anyone wanted to bring up from last time before we start on the next one?
Nothing else from me.
Okay, cool. Angus, do you want to read the first bit of the next part? Let's see. Yeah, this subsection is a bit long, so you can just read a page or so.
Yeah, no problem. Part 4, Invention. A. Elementary invention, the role of free activity in the discovery of mediations. Subsection 1, the different species of compatibility, detour, and elementary behavior. To what situation does invention correspond? To a problem, which is to say, to an interruption due to an obstacle, or a discontinuity acting as a barrier to an operative implementation, accomplissement, opératoire, that is continuous in its project. What is problematic is a situation that dualizes an action, chops it up by separating it into segments, either for lack of a middle term or because the fulfillment of one part of the action destroys another equally necessary part. The two fundamental problematic modes are hiatus and incompatibility. Both amount to an action's failure to adapt to itself intrinsically across the various sequences and subsets it presupposes. Solutions show up as restorations of continuity, enabling the progressiveness of operative modes along paths previously invisible within the structure of the given reality. Invention is the emergence of an extrinsic compatibility between the milieu and the organism, and of an intrinsic compatibility between the subsets of the action. Detours, the fabrication of instruments, and the association of several operators all represent different means of reestablishing intrinsic and extrinsic compatibility. When a problem is resolved, the dimension of the final act of the result encompasses in its dimensional characteristics the operative regime that produced it. For instance, in a classical tale, a rolling boulder stuck in the middle of a narrow path cannot be moved by individual travelers trying to move it separately, since it is too heavy, though it is easily pushed aside by the travelers working together. Here the problem cannot be resolved as it is initially given, when the road is a place of passage where multiple individual itineraries do not compound, couplage. Rather, the group of travelers exists virtually from the point of view of the result, since it is only at that moment that they can all resume their travel, even though they arrived at the obstacle at different times depending on their particular trip. The compounding of efforts, visible in the unity of the result, points back to the act of resolution and to invention. Within the conditions of the problem, the lines of a possible solution already appear, albeit negatively. The accumulation of people stopped by the boulder, one after the other, progressively constitutes a simultaneity of expectations and needs, thus attention towards the simultaneity of departures once the obstacle is removed. The virtual simultaneity of imagined departures points back to the simultaneity of efforts in which the solution lies. Anticipation and foresight are not enough, since each traveler is perfectly capable of imagining how he would go on walking if the boulder were pushed aside. What is needed is that anticipation return to the present by altering the structure and conditions of the ongoing action. In this case, it is collective anticipation that alters each of the individual actions by constructing a system of synergy. It's a pretty dense paragraph, but there are some familiar themes from volume 1 of individuation in this, like the idea that while the problem doesn't completely determine the result, it does already include the contours within which possible resolutions will have to be included. And this, I guess I'm trying to see in the example of the boulder. So, I assume that there is going to be a tension between two different elements, which are resolved by the invention, which is pushing the boulder out of the way. But and the tension is produced by the hiatus, the suspension of the journey in this case. But I'm not sure whether the two elements are like literally the path to the boulder and the path after the boulder, like the resumption of the journey that need to be, or between which a resonance needs to be instituted by the resolution of the problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind here about so any sort of problem for Simondon has to involve a tension of some kind that will be productively used to formulate the solution to that problem through this process of invention. Here, I think maybe the tension we could see it as holding between these different people that are sort of stuck behind this boulder. So each of them has an individual journey. They're probably going to different places. They arrive at different times. They have no intention of forming a group as they set out on their journey. But then when they arrive at this point on their path where the boulder is blocking the road, they have this tension between this sort of individual sort of orientation of like trying to get to their destination, and then the sort of problem that this obstacle poses for them, and the solution to this problem is to invent the collective action of pushing the boulder aside. So yeah, I think the tension might be more between the individual nature of the journey and the sort of obstacle presented by the boulder, with the collective action as the invention that resolves that tension. But yeah, it's not 100% clear here what exactly we're meant to see as sort of the terms of the tension. But yeah, in general, there's this idea of invention as having to do, or sort of like the most elementary form of invention for Simondon is the detour, where instead of like in sort of direct action, you have some sort of goal that you're oriented towards. It can be very simple, like drinking a glass of water, and you just sort of perform the action that brings about that makes that goal realized. You just pick up the glass of water and drink it. There's no sort of deliberation or invention required to perform this action. It's just immediately evident what you have to do, and you just do it. But then as soon as there's some sort of obstacle where, like, say the glass is empty, now you have to, it's obviously a very limited form of invention, but you have to realize, okay, where can I get water? Where can I fill up this glass? You have to like sort of make a slight detour. Instead of just picking up the glass of water and drinking it, you have to, find where the water is, fill up the glass, and then drink it. So this is obviously a very, poor form of invention, but this is like the sort of basic form of invention is this detour, where instead of just proceeding directly to a goal, you have to do something else first, so that eventually you can perform the action that gets you the goal. And like an example that he uses in individuation, and I think maybe in some other texts as well, and we'll see this a little bit later, is this experimental setting for where it was a jaguar for whatever reason. I don't know why they used a jaguar for this instead of a rat or a monkey, but this animal in its wild setting is capable of tracking prey, and like if, for example, the prey is on the other side of a river, the jaguar is able to go up or down stream and find a spot where it can cross the river and then backtrack and pick up the trail again. So it's making a detour and sort of reorienting itself towards the goal after the detour. Whereas in a laboratory setting, this animal is not capable of performing some simpler detours that involve, I don't know, pressing one button before pressing another one or something sort of elementary like that. And so Simondon takes this capacity to engage in a detour or to invent some sort of compatibility between elements of an action that are separated from each other. He takes this as a sign of this sort of capacity for invention, And he thinks that we need to look at this capacity in naturalistic settings as opposed to purely laboratory settings, because the laboratory setting is a kind of impoverished environment, and it like even just the sort of anxiety provoked by the lighting and all these things in the animal can prevent the animal from exercising this capacity that it's capable of exercising in a natural setting. So yeah, this capacity to invent is not something that is sort of purely contained in the animal as this organism bounded by its skin. It's a product of the interaction of the animal and its environment, and so it's only in a particular environment, especially when that environment is structured as a territory of that animal, that it's capable of performing these kinds of acts of invention. So yeah, I think that's sort of the direction that we're heading in this section, is towards more and more sophisticated forms of invention, and how this invention arises in interaction with the environment.
I thought it was kind of interesting that he says that the group of travelers exists virtually from the point of view of the result. I guess because you need the group of travelers in order for the problem to be resolved. But kind of from the other point of view, I guess from the point of view of the problem, the simultaneity of the departure of the travelers with like non-simultaneous arrivals, I guess, is also described as virtual. I guess actually maybe he's saying the same thing here, that the problem is going to, the solution of the problem, the contours of the solution are going to require both a group of travelers and a simultaneous departure.
Yeah, I think the idea here, so when he talks about this virtual group of travelers, so the idea is that each individual traveler can easily imagine like the result of solving the problem. Like they can easily say to themselves, okay, once this boulder is gone, I can just keep walking and continue on my path. So that part is like doesn't involve any sort of cognitive sophistication. What does involve the cognitive sophistication is getting like sort of traveling backwards along the path from that departure point of proceeding along the rest of the path. You have to sort of intellectually work backwards from there and say, okay, what would have to happen first before I can actually proceed with my journey in the way that I'm imagining. And so it's this collective effort is this sort of virtual point, because it's the prerequisite for that imagined continuation of the journey. So you have to, you start from this imagined continuation of the journey, and then you work backwards from there and say, okay, if I am going to be able to continue my journey, then we need to collectively push this boulder out of the way. So it's it's this kind of retroactive effect of the future, of the anticipation of a certain action in the future. So it's virtual in that sense, in the sense that it's not something present or sort of immediately given in the environment of the various people that are standing around this boulder. It's something that they have to arrive at through some sort of intellectual process. And then the simultaneity of departure, again, is virtual, because it's only as a result of the collective action that all of the people can finally leave and proceed on their journey. So yeah, the virtuality here, I think, essentially just means it's something that can only be reached through an intellectual process of some kind, as opposed to something that would be given in the situation as something I could easily achieve just directly acting on my environment.
That's really interesting. And later, I think he says that in order to be like a proper detour, there needs to be an element of representation, which I guess is what. So you need the imagination or the like imaging in order to achieve the invention, as opposed to, as you said, the path being kind of immediately given. And he talks about some animals are capable of kind of representing a solution in these various like obstacle courses, I guess. And those, I guess, the idea is that the successful imagination of the solution, which precedes the invention, is what makes it kind of a proper detour as as an actual invention rather than mere action on the environment.
Yeah, this is always a difficult point in animal psychology. In terms of like if you have say like a classic maze setting and you have a rat that has to navigate this maze, you always like one of the sort of basic precautions that you have to take in this experimental setup is to ensure that like you have like one path leads to the food and the other path leads to nothing or leads to a I don't know electric shock or whatever. You have to ensure that there's nothing that's sort of immediately given in the rat's starting position that sort of serves as a sign that allows the rat to just follow this sign that is present and like if it can smell the food, for example, it will just follow the smell and it doesn't have to actually learn anything about the maze. It just has to go in the direction where the smell is getting stronger. So you want to ensure that like the rat actually has to learn the maze, and then you can sort of conclude that there's some sort of internal representation of the maze in the rat's mind, that it actually, whatever exactly that looks like inside a rat's mind, but it like whether it's an image similar to our sort of mental images or it's something completely different, at least there's something that sort of depicts the structure of the environment and sort of allows the rat to locate itself in relation to the goal and then find a path that leads to the goal. But if the rat is just sort of smelling the food from its starting point and then just following that smell, then you don't need to actually suppose that the rat has any inner representation of the maze itself. It could just be following the smell and not caring whether it turns left or right or whatever. And it's often like, our senses, our sort of relation to the world is set up in a certain way, but a rat has a very different sort of relation to the world in terms of what senses it relies on. It probably relies on smell much more than we do, for example. So it's not always obvious to us. It's hard to exclude to say definitively that there's nothing sort of given in the in what the rat is experiencing at the starting point of the maze that it can rely on to just follow and find the food source without forming that mental representation. I remember seeing one or an account of one study where they were trying to determine whether dogs can recognize different shapes. Like, can they learn that whenever there's a triangle on the screen, if you press this button, you get a reward, for example. And they tried to train these dogs on this, and the dogs were successful. But then they eventually realized that the dogs were not recognizing shapes; they were just recognizing how much of the screen was illuminated because the different shapes occupy different areas on the screen. So if you start like changing the size of the shapes, the dogs like suddenly weren't able to recognize triangles anymore. So like what aspect of the environment sort of stands out for humans that we see, we see that the screen has a triangle on it, and then the dog is pressing the button, and then the dog gets the reward, and you like for us, it's sort of obvious that the dog is recognizing the triangle, but what the dog is actually recognizing might be something quite different. And so these animals might be recognizing all sorts of signs in the environment that we are not recognizing, and that are much harder for us to sort of decipher. So it's very hard in an experimental setting to like exclude the possibility of any of these sort of sign recognition processes that allow the animal to reach the goal without having to use this sort of intellectual detour operation. And so like forcing an animal to make this kind of intellectual detour is or proving that an animal is doing this is very difficult.
I just wanted to point out at the end of this paragraph, it seems like so this is kind of simultaneous individuation of like a kind of collective, at least of these two travelers, and of an invention. And in volume 1, he talks a couple of places about how like the resolution of perception into action requires the collective, but didn't give really any examples of what that might look like. I know he means it in a much broader sense than like, I don't think he means that action in the collective is always an invention, but this might be, I think this is an instance of how perception is resolved into action in a collective. But I think that in general, I think in volume 1, it's just kind of all action is intersubjective in a way, but this might be an example of that.
Yeah, I think that passage, I think if I remember correctly, we had some difficulty with that passage in Individuation Volume 1, in sort of making sense of what exactly he's saying there. But I think here, at least, I think the collective in the sort of proper sense of the term for Simondon is always an invention or is the result of an invention. So there are various groupings that are not collectives, an office setting is not a collective because each person is sort of assigned to a particular role. You have a certain job you have to do, an office or a factory or whatever. Everyone has their individual role that they're assigned, and this is not a collective. And then likewise, or sort of the opposite extreme is a market where each agent is just sort of acting in their own interest and then interacting only insofar as it's as it the interaction is a part of what they have to do to achieve their own interests. These are two forms of groupings of people or of subjects that are not collectives, and so a collective is something much more subtle and sort of ambiguous, but it always involves this element of invention because a collective is never something that is already given. It's only you can only ever form a collective with someone else by means of inventing something new that wasn't there before the collective was formed. And so, yeah, I think collective and invention are sort of coordinate concepts for Simondon.
Right, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think he talks about the collective in terms of the resolution of a problem in volume 1 in a couple of places. It kind of ties in with some of Guattari's papers on different kinds of groups, and for Guattari, a subject group, which is, I guess, a group that avoids certain destructive, repetitive group behaviors. Subject group is a group that has a common goal, like a common artistic project, for instance, or any kind of common goal. So I think this kind of works with that idea.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And the one thing to sort of keep in mind, though, is that we saw in volume 1 that the collective can also subjects can be related to the collective through this, he talks about this ordeal of solitude. So the hero or the saint or whoever can be sort of oriented towards the collective or related to the collective, even if they're sort of living in a cave and meditating on their own or something like that. They can have so the relationship to the collective is not necessarily an actual sort of social interaction with other people. It's something, again, more sort of mysterious than that. So just sort of writing poetry in isolation, and this, maybe we can connect this with Deleuze and Guattari talk about this, the people to come. You write, a writer might be writing sort of very hermetic texts that no one sort of understands in the time and place that they're writing, but then they're writing for the sake of a collective that doesn't exist yet, and so they're sort of calling that collective into being through their writing. So yeah, these types of relationships to a collective are much less immediate than sort of I don't know, pushing a boulder aside or something like that. So, and again, this boulder example is meant to be sort of the most elementary form of collective you can picture. It's just there's a sort of immediate obstacle and there's an obvious solution, and then you the collective forms, and then it sort of dissolves right away, and each of the people just sort of goes their own way afterwards. Yeah, I can't remember where they draw that line from. I'm not sure if it's Rimbaud or I was thinking it was from Kafka, but I'm maybe misremembering that. But yeah, I don't know where they draw that line from, but they use it on many occasions. But yeah, I think we can think of a collective as like the collective and the invention are sort of co-occurring phenomena. Like you only ever have a collective through invention, and invention, even if it's done by an individual in isolation, it's always sort of calling a collective into being, even if that collective might never like sort of be manifested as a group of individual people.
Yeah, that's great. I remember. I think in the conclusion he like explicitly talks about like non-historically simultaneous collective, which I remember reminded me of in Being in Time. I think there's a part where Heidegger talks about like reciprocative rejoinder between like a Dasein that is here and a Dasein that has been here, which is kind of a similar idea, I think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember that bit in Being in Time. So is it in connection with historicity in Division 2, where he's talking about the way that Dasein is historically situated?
I think so. I want to say it's section 74, but I could be wrong.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So like this is a sort of like central point of like a hermeneutic understanding of history, like in the way that Heidegger and Gadamer and other people in that vein like understand history. So history is not obviously for this kind of understanding is not just like a linear sequence of events, but there's a kind of relationship of the subject or the person who is located in history. That person might be connected to some text that was written hundreds of years earlier. Like you can think of the way that religious communities, for example, are structured around the use of a particular text. Those texts might have been written hundreds or thousands of years before that community is sort of operating. And like the daily life of that community is sort of reinterpreting, I guess, in a sense, the text, but not necessarily changing the interpretation, but just sort of giving new life to the text by means of sort of structuring their life around that text. So like just by virtue of reading a text every day or on a regular basis and sort of orienting your life around the teachings of a text and saying I'm sort of acting in this way because the text tells me to do so. By virtue of doing this, you're sort of making that text a living document as opposed to just like some ink on a page sitting on a shelf somewhere. And so this sort of collective, this religious community is inventing the text anew each time that they read it or each time that they call upon the text to determine what to do in a concrete situation. I think that's a similar point to what Simondon was talking about how invention and collective are sort of coordinate concepts. Okay, so we can go on to the next page. We spent a long time on one page, but it was there's a lot of content in that one page. But let's go on to the next page. If I can get a volunteer to read a page or so.
Yeah, sure, I can read. Sorry, I just have my Being in Time out looking at the section there.
Yeah, you can find the reference for us later. That would be great. We're on page 140. We're at hence there is a structuring.
Okay, give me a second. My pagination is off, so I'll have to search for that.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're in the PDF, right? Yeah.
Okay,
it's
got it.
like one page in from the start of part 4, if that helps.
No, I got it. Okay, I'm here. Hence there is a structuring return of the content of the anticipation onto the formula of the present action. It is a return of information, or rather a return of organization, whose source is of the order of magnitude of the result. The regime of the operation thought of as carried out and complete. Invention sets up a certain kind of retroaction, a recurring input or feedback, which goes from the regime of the completed result to the organization of the means and subsets within a mode of compatibility. In the example of the boulder, the organization of compatibility in the form of synergy amounts to setting the force of each traveler against a fraction of the boulder to be moved. Since the boulder is not divisible, this can take place only if the boulder is pushed at the same moment by all the travelers. The root of the solution is a communication between two orders of magnitude, that of the result, the road reopened to all, and that of the problem event, a barrier across the path of each one, whose data are altered. Within the new perspective of a collective and no longer individual result, the operation amounts to each traveler moving a fraction of the boulder. The collective result is still compatible with the individual result, the path being open to each one when it is open to the group. Similarly, the individual action of pushing is compatible with the sum of the actions of other individuals, thanks to the additive simultaneity of parallel thrust. It is this intrinsic compatibility that enables the extrinsic compatibility of the relation between a single person's force and the weight of a fraction of the boulder. Should I go on?
Yeah, you can continue up to the next paragraph break, I think, on the next page.
Okay. In such a case, invention is facilitated by the fact that the subjects are at the same time virtual operators. The interruption of the action caused by the problem event prompts a shift to the order of magnitude of the result, which is that of compatibility. The different interruptions of the originally independent trips generates the collective of stopped travelers, thereby creating, through a negative effect, the field within which the compatible action can unfold. The association through a community of intentions within a homogeneous group is a particular case, since it requires neither instrumental mediation nor a division of labor. As soon as the problem can find a solution only in an order of magnitude very different than that of the individual and of the elementary gesture, because of size or complexity, it becomes necessary to resort to heterogeneous mediations, and the task of invention bearing on these mediations is considerable. But invention preserves its functional place as a transfer system between two different orders of magnitude. Simple machines such as a lever or a capstan, even the inclined plane or the winch display in their structure, the essential function of transfer, such devices materialize. They display in their structure the essential function of transfer such devices materialize. With a capstan or a hoist, a single operator in each of his gestures acts as if he were moving the fraction of the load that is compatible with his strength. Yet he moves the entire indivisible load, albeit only a small distance. Invention in such a case, while respecting the principle of conservation of work, consists in varying both factors, intensity of force and displacement, in order to adapt them to the capacities of the organism of the operator. The problem is solved when a communication is established between the action system of the subject who encounters the problem and the regime of reality of the result. The subject is part of the order of reality in which the problem is posed. He is not part of the order of imagined results. Invention is the discovery of mediation between two orders, a mediation thanks to which the action system of the subject may gain purchase on the production of the result through coordinated action.
Right. So this, I think, helps make clearer what we were discussing earlier about the problem and the two terms of the tension that make up the problem. So in the case of the boulder, we have the sort of tension is between the two orders of magnitude that, the subject is capable of pushing, say, 100 pounds, but the boulder weighs 1,000 pounds. So there's this difference of order of magnitude that has to be bridged, in this case, by the collective push of the 10 people that are stuck behind this boulder. And then all these other sort of instruments or tools that he described here, they again serve to bridge between different orders of magnitude. Like a pulley allows you to use horizontal movement to sort of translates horizontal movement into vertical displacement. By pulling on this rope horizontally, you lift a heavy object vertically a smaller distance, and so a heavy barrel or case or whatever that you couldn't lift up, you couldn't pick it up just with your hands and lift it 3 meters up onto the hold of a ship. If you attach the pulley to it and then you just pull the rope horizontally, then you can lift the object through like a longer, by pulling horizontally over a longer distance, you lift the object vertically over a shorter distance. Or again, a lever, any of these sort of simple machines, you're sort of restructuring the situation in such a way as to bridge a difference of orders of magnitude. And so in these cases, it's very simple. or a relatively simple difference. It's just, I can lift X pounds of weight, and this object is, Y pounds, which is greater than X, and so I need to find an alternate way of lifting this object that doesn't involve just picking it up with my hands. And so, it's just a sort of restructuring of the angles and the directions of motion, so that the force that you're able to exert is exercised in a different way, and you bring about the motion of the object that you want in a sort of indirect manner, and this allows you to bridge between the two different sizes of the amount that you're capable of the amount of force you're capable of exerting, and the amount of force it takes to actually move the object. But in other situations, it's a more complicated or less direct relationship between the goal and the means that you have available to you. So I don't know if I'm trying to think of an example here, but I don't know if the goal is I want to get across the river, and the river is bigger than I can swim across, or it has a current that I can't it's too strong for me to swim across, or whatever. Then I might eventually come up with the idea of building a boat. I might see some logs floating across the river and think it would be easier for me to get across if I could sit on a log and sort of paddle or something like that. Like you sort of find these mediating points between the goal that you can't reach and your actual capacities of actions that you can perform, and then these mediating terms, you might need like a whole series of mediating terms, like to build the boat you might have to chop down a tree, and then you might have to hollow out the log, or like there might be a whole series of steps you have to take before you can finally have your boat and then get across the river and continue your journey or whatever it is you wanted to do. So each step of the mediation might require further mediations between those steps, and this is what makes certain inventions more complex than others. So like the invention of a lever is a fairly simple invention, it's something that you can just sort of stick a branch underneath a stone and lift it up and sort of happen upon the solution. But more complicated devices or more complicated inventions require multiple steps of mediation, and so there's going to be multiple different orders of magnitude that are bridged through the different steps of the invention.
This kind of makes me think of what little I've read from Laurent and what Stiegler says about him, but the idea that there has to be, in like human tool use, there has to be some first moment when there's a move from like the use of like already broken stones as tools to the kind of deliberate fracturing of a stone to use as a tool, which I think can be characterized in this process that he calls as a recurring input or feedback in this first paragraph, but is also just like teleological in the sense that the concept has to be present at the beginning of the action in order to effectuate it, I guess, because it has to be you have to be sort of conscious of conscious of this concept that is different from what is immediately given to you.
Yeah, I've only read a little bit of Le Roi, so I can't really comment on that connection. But like older texts, you sometimes see like the distinctive trait of human beings specified as tool use, that humans, unlike other animals, humans use tools, and that turns out not to be true. I mean, obviously it's true that humans do use tools, but there are many other animals that use tools as well. And then sort of the next sort of step of trying to specify what is unique about humans is to say that humans are the only animals that build tools, that create tools out of that, instead of just picking up aspects of the environment they're already given. And that also turns out not to be quite true, but there are fewer animals that like chimpanzees, if I remember correctly, they will pick up a branch or a stick or something and strip off the leaves or any irregularities, and then use the stripped stick. They'll stick it into an ant nest and then pick up a bunch of ants and eat them. So like they're not just sort of picking up a branch and using it immediately. They're taking the branch and then doing stuff to it. And there's a crow doing the same thing. So they will they'll pick up a branch, manipulate the branch to make it have the desired properties that will allow it to serve as a tool, and then use that tool to collect food, which is the goal. So it's not just it's a two-step detour, like not just using a tool to achieve a goal, but acting on something to turn it into a tool, and then using that tool to achieve a goal. So there are fewer animals that are capable of doing this than like many animals are capable of using tools that they pick up from the environment, and then a smaller set of animals is capable of modifying elements of the environment and then using those modified elements as tools. But again, it's not unique to humans because we see chimpanzees, I think some crows. So there are a variety of animals that do this. They are able to produce tools. What maybe is unique to humans is the use of tools to create new tools. Like so humans, we don't just pick up a stick and then strip the branches and then use it to gather food or whatever. But you might a human, even in like the early stone tools, like you would use you'd fracture stones to produce one type of knife, for example, or axe head or whatever, and then use that tool to break carve a wooden tool, for example. So using one tool to create a second tool, and then using that second tool to achieve a goal. I don't know of any instances where other animals use a tool to produce a second tool. So that would be like a 3-step detour. I haven't heard of that, but it's possible that it does exist. But yeah, so that seems to be, at least as far as I know, unique to humans. It's so like a multi-step tool detour where you're using one tool to produce a second tool. And of course, they're like one of the difficulties of studying this kind of behavior is that only stone tools are likely to survive. Like anything made of wood or bone or whatever, these tools will most likely decay over thousands of years, and so we don't see the intermediate products. We only see the first stone tool, and so we have to sort of guess, what the stone tool might have been used for. So yeah, it's a very difficult task to try to reconstruct, what these tool use processes might have looked like in early hominids, for example.
From what I understand about Stiegler, I might be getting this wrong, but I think he emphasizes the necessary temporality, or the fact that the creation of a tool. I mean, I guess this would apply to crows and chimpanzees and octopuses or any other animals as well. But you have to have this like a combination of memory and foresight, which kind of come together or are actualized in the construction and use of the tool. And it seems like Simondon has a similar emphasis here.
Yeah, so this bit about retroaction or feedback is that, so you have a desired future state, and then you have to, this representation of this future state has to sort of feed back on my current actions. I have to sort of work backwards from, like, there are a bunch of ants in this nest that I want to get to. My fingers are too big to fit in the hole. How can I, modify the environment in such a way that I can get at the ants? And then, at some point, this inventive chimpanzee figured out I can take the stick, I can strip the branches off, and then I can stick the stick into the hole and collect the ant that way. So yeah, it's a sort of taking these incompatible elements of the world, the ants in their nests and me outside hungry, I can find a way of bridging between these incompatible elements using a stick that I've stripped the leaves off of. So this future state of me eating the ants is sort of brought about, or is the goal towards which the action is oriented, and this goal is what makes me perform this detour. It's temporality is definitely a part of the structure of any sort of detour action. Like, it's only a detour if it's actually oriented towards a goal. Otherwise, it's just sort of trial and error, which is also something a lot of animals do. If you're a monkey trying to get into an ant nest, you might just try poking it with various objects until something works. That's another way of solving a problem, but is distinct from actually grasping the idea that this stick has to be modified in such a way that it fits into this hole, and then I can get the ants. Like the monkey might not be quite as intellectually sophisticated as the chimpanzee, by just trying a bunch of things until they finally get the ants, whereas the chimpanzee has a sort of grasp of the situation and understands like the geometry of the stick in relation to the hole and how the stick has to be modified to fit into the hole. The goal, it's only because there's this goal that structures the whole behavior of the animal that we recognize this behavior as a detour and not just as a kind of trial and error. Okay, let's do one more reading, and then we can discuss and then stop there for today. I think is probably a good amount, so I can read the next page or so. For the problems related to moving loads, there is a problem when the action system and corporeal strength are not immediately efficacious. The most elementary inventions amount to using an adaptive mediator that links the regime of the results to the aptitudes of the operator. The human body, for instance, is ineffective for transporting a liquid. An intermediary solid is necessary, like a goat skin or a barrel, that serves as an envelope with respect to the liquid, and as a maneuverable solid with respect to the human organism. The same goes for pulverized substances or small objects that must be placed in a bag, or better, a pouch with a strap appropriate for carrying on one's shoulder. When it is the volume of the load that causes the problem, the mediating object is a pole or a platter like those hunters use for large game. Finally, when the problem comes from the disproportion between the force of the operator and the mass of the load, the mediating object belongs to the general category of impedance adapters described in earlier examples. These various mediations have a common essence as adaptation systems. The molecules of a liquid or the particles of powder are of an order of magnitude that does not make them easily maneuverable by the human body without an intermediary object which gathers them by the billions. Solid loads, though they cannot be divided, are manipulated with the aid of machines that bring about an adaptation of forces. In both cases, the organism of the operator, in acting on the intermediary object, operates as though it dealt with a solid object of an order of magnitude that is homogeneous with it, and with physical-chemical characteristics compatible with the conservation of the organism. Mid-range temperatures, non-sharp edges, non-toxic and non-corrosive composition, etc. Intermediary objects are required to safeguard the body's integrity whenever the object is, in one of its characteristics, too heterogeneous with respect to the organism: extreme temperature, acidity, causticness, toxicity, etc. Through invention, the intrinsic compatibility of the organism extends to a situation which, initially, as a problem, does not admit such a compatibility. But there are different levels in the discovery of mediations that result in compatibility. If mediation consists merely in modifying or supplementing an operative mode, it is less complex than if it requires an intermediary object whose selection and use call for immediate operative modes. The detour through an instrument is not just an operative detour. It presupposes a cognitive detour, a subordination of the actional chain of selection or fabrication of the object to the pursuit of the end, with a temporary substitution of the instrument object for the end object. An intermediary case between inventions of detour and instrumental mediations is the use of animals, or more generally living beings, as intermediary objects which one need not build but only choose, capture, train, and develop. The large class of domestic animals and cultivated plants was likely among the first depositories of the inventive activity of the human species, at a time when instruments were still few and rudimentary. This category of modified living beings that preserve their spontaneity and capacity for self-reproduction is comparable to an intermediary object with multiple properties. Training is the institution of a detour in behavior in the animal, but the beneficiaries of this detour are humans. The study of situations involving a detour has generally been conducted to measure the intelligence of various animal species. We should nonetheless note that the various experimental situations allow measurement only when basic conditions are similar. For a great many species, however, the pursuit of a goal in relation to which a detour behavior could occur cannot be dissociated from the pre-existing organization of a territory. It is in accordance with the differentiated lines of this territory that a detour is possible, in the form of a change in itinerary, of relinquishing a main itinerary in favor of a less trammeled secondary itinerary that is not random and is already marked in the same way as the main itinerary. In other words, possible detours are part of the territory. They were predetermined at the moment it was surveyed, and they are the result of a learning experience, usually from early in life, in which the images directing action were formed. Outside of the territory, the detour that is feasible without a prior organization of the territory is a detour at a short distance from the goal being perceptible but not directly attainable, which corresponds only to the terminal phase of a behavior. To this first reservation concerning the generality of the detour behavior as invention, a second can be added. The detour for a given species belongs to a definite behavior corresponding to a determined motivation, a certain level of vigilance, behaviors of predation or flight, etc. Sometimes the detour is spontaneous in a definite situation and is actually part of the action system of the animal, with imperceptible transitions from simple motor schemas, such as the twisted leap of the rabbit on the run, to more complex specific behaviors, the zigzagging flight of the hare, and to the quote-unquote maneuvers of females leading the predator away from their offspring, quail or seal. The detour emerges as a modality of flight or defense as much as an aspect of the pursuit of prey, enabling the predator to get close without being seen or scented. In this case, the detour is not exactly a detour in relation to a goal, but a specific mode of action. It is only in the final phase of the behavior that, close to shelter or nearing the prey, we can speak of a detour in the anthropomorphic sense of the term. What occurs then for the animal is the true substitution of a mode of action by another. For instance, the substitution of the final leap of the predator by extending the slow crawl of the approach. In a general manner, then, it is in terms of behavior flexibility that problems of detours corresponding to the majority of experimental situations are posed, rather than in terms of the invention of a new trajectory. To be able to detour, the animal must first reach the category of behavior within which the detour exists, despite types of stimulation apt to trigger, for instance, rectilinear leaping or flying, but not behaviors that include detour. It is this change of category or behavioral class that is not always possible or requires learning. Hence, a detour made possible during exploration may not be available during flight because the behavioral class has changed. In such conditions, can a detour be considered as an invention within animal behavior? Right, so here's some discussion of different kinds of detour. So in the case of moving objects, like the problem for humans of moving different objects or picking up different objects and putting them in a certain place. So our hands and arms and everything are perfectly adequate when it comes to sort of medium-sized solid objects, a stone or an apple or a tree branch or whatever. But if you're dealing with a liquid like water or kind of particles of grain or sand or whatever, anyone who's tried to build a sandcastle or whatever has experienced that it's not that easy to pick up sand and transport it, especially over long distances. It's and even harder to carry water in your hands. So here we have a sort of problem of incompatibility of the capacities of the human body and of a problem of moving a liquid or some sort of powder. So the solution is to envelop the liquid or the powder in some sort of boundary, like a goat skin, for example, and then this boundary serves as a solid object for human hands. You can pick up the goat skin and just the same way that you would pick up, a stone. But then internally, it serves as a boundary for the liquid. So it sort of mediates between this substance that is very difficult for humans to transport using just their hands or just their naked body. It mediates between the human body and the problem of transporting the liquid, and sort of bridges between these two incompatible terms. So in these cases, these are somewhat more complex than just moving an object that's too heavy for me and then getting 3-4 people to push simultaneously. So here there's a certain heterogeneity between the goal of moving the object and the properties of the human body that requires this invention of something that doesn't, resemble any of the pieces of the problem. So there's nothing, if I'm, sitting next to a pond or a river or whatever, and I'm thinking, it'd be great if I could get this water to my house, which is, located 100 meters away or something like that. There's nothing in the situation that sort of shows me that a goat skin would be the solution to the problem. It's something that I have to figure out. I have to have some sort of insight into the properties of the goat skin and of the water and my hands and everything. I have to grasp all of this together and then figure out that this goat skin would serve as an adequate vessel for transporting the water. So yeah, this is a more a less direct mediation than just pushing the boulder with a group of other people. And so what this means is that I'm sort of extending my capacities as a living being. Like as a living being has a certain repertoire of behavioral capacities of actions that it can perform. But by means of these technical objects, I'm extending that capacity, so I can now transport liquids. I can use a pair of tongs to pick up something that's too hot for me to touch, for example. You can continue extending the boundaries of what actions I can perform in a way that would not have been possible without these technical objects. And so this is what Simondon talks about, or in connection with this, he talks about how, and this is what I mentioned earlier, about how animals in a laboratory setting might not be able to perform detours that they're actually quite easily capable of performing in the wild. And so this is the relationship between the invention or detour behavior and the environment of the animal. So animals have their environment is often structured in terms of a territory. Like this is my home. This is like like it's a nest or a burrow or whatever. And then the space around that home is part of the territory. There are certain paths that it knows well. It knows that it can hide under this bush, or it can climb this tree or whatever. And so in that territory, it has sort of a pre-given understanding. It's learned all the different detours that it can perform. Whereas in the laboratory setting, it's this sort of, an empty cage or a bare room with harsh lighting that it's like sort of isolated in this room. And then it has to figure out how can I make a detour and reach my goal. And so in this setting, it has no sort of reference point. It hasn't learned how to navigate this environment, and so it's not capable of performing that detour. So again, the detour behavior or this invention behavior is a product of the animal in interaction with its environment, and not just of the animal sort of in isolation. And yeah, so in that last paragraph, he gives a few examples of different types of detour behavior that certain animals exhibit. So like some prey animals, for example, when they're running away from a predator, they will run in a zigzag pattern, and that makes it harder for the predator to sort of predict where the animal is going to be at the next step. So you can't just sort of jump and catch the animal just by extrapolating its path as it's running, because its path is constantly changing. And then there's more and so that's a relatively unsophisticated detour. It's just so in this case, you have the sort of immediate goal is escaping from the predator, and getting as far away from the predator as possible. But the sort of detour is to travel in a zigzag and not in a straight line, which actually makes you slower at getting away from the predator, but it makes it harder for the predator to cut you off. But this is fairly simple kind of detour behavior. But then there's more sophisticated ones. So there are certain animals where the mother, if the mother is separated from the infants, for example, the mother will run in the opposite direction from the infants in the nest. And so the mother will lead the predator away from the nest and in that way, they're sort of protecting their offspring. So here again, the nest is sort of the location of safety that would ultimately be the goal for the animal to reach, the prey animal to reach safety in the nest, but they actually run in the opposite direction, away from the goal, to lead the predator in the other direction. And then eventually, if all goes well for the prey animal, they lose the predator, and then they can, backtrack and return to the nest. Yeah, so this is a somewhat more complicated behavior because it involves not just the one animal, but the animal has to recognize that its offspring are vulnerable to this predator and perform this action of leading the predator away from the nest. And then, like, Simon doesn't describe these types of cases, but the things that we talked about with chimpanzees and crows that use tools are even more indirect, because here it's not a relationship to a predator that is immediately in my environment, but it's my desire to get at these ants that I can't even see right now, that I know are in this tree or wherever. It's this knowledge of the situation that is not based on an immediate perception that I am using to as like my goal term, and then I take a detour by picking up this tool, and then using that tool to get at the ants that are hidden in the tree. So this is an even more indirect form of detour.
I know we're stopping at this paragraph, but so it seems like I think in the next paragraph he's going to say this, but it seems like the point is that every invention is a detour, but not every detour is necessarily an invention. Like the rabbit that's, just does a twisting leap as it's running away from a predator wouldn't be an invention, because it doesn't require this kind of feedback or teleological use of a concept.
Yeah, I think for Simondon, he sees a sort of continuity between these terms, but maybe the most elementary behavior that the most elementary form of detour, like the rabbit running in a zigzag pattern, is not properly speaking an invention, because this is something that rabbits do without having to sort of come up with the idea of doing it. If you raise a rabbit in captivity, and then it's chased by a predator, it will probably do this without having had to think about it or having to sort of come up with this idea. So it's maybe instinctive in that sense. So it's not an invention, properly speaking. But yeah, I think for Simondon, there's a continuity between this most elementary detour and then the very elaborate detours that humans are capable of, deciding that this goat skin would be a good way of transporting water. The most elementary forms of detours probably are not inventions in the proper sense of the term, but all inventions are detours of it could be multiple steps of detour. Like even in the case of the goat skin, it's a fairly simple tool, but I have to actually catch a goat or raise a goat and then kill it, and then take the skin and do whatever processing on it that needs to be done before I can actually use it to transport water. So it's not it's like multiple steps of mediation to actually get to my goal of transporting water. So this again is just like a much more complicated, much more elaborate detour behavior but it's in continuity with the rabbit running in a zigzag pattern.
I'd be interested to see if Simondon talks about the invention of a work of art later in the book, because what this kind of makes me think of is in the Critique of Judgment, Kant talks about the creation of a work of art as not involving a concept. You can't have a concept in mind in order to create an artwork, but the idea of having some kind of image or representation in present to your mind in advance of the action seems to be necessary for invention for Simondon.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting. I don't think he does talk about artworks in this part, but I may be misremembering. But yeah, it's also interesting to potentially make a distinction between having a concept that guides my action and having an image that guides my action. A concept is something intellectual, in the case of the goat skin, I might need to have a sort of intuitive grasp of the physics of liquids and surfaces and membranes and things like that, even if I don't have an explicit theory of how fluids operate or whatever. I still have some sort of grasp that liquids are hard to transport in my hands, but if I put this liquid into this skin, then I can transport it much more easily. So there's a sort of intellectual grasp of the properties of the various objects that I want to manipulate. But in other cases, there might be the invention process might be guided not so much by an intellectual grasp of the properties of the objects I want to manipulate, but instead by an image. And like Simondon, I think it was in the introduction in this text, or maybe it was somewhere else, but he talks about how humans have long had this image of flight. Of course, heavier than air flight was only invented at the beginning of the 20th century or end of the 19th century. But the means by which it was brought about is very different than like a bird's flight. But there were all sorts of attempts and designs. Leonardo da Vinci had like a sort of quasi helicopter design. And so like there have been various attempts to bring about human flight over the centuries. So these were sort of guided not so much by like an understanding of aerodynamics, of course, because that science didn't exist at the time. But they were brought about by like an image of flying is really cool, and it would be great if I could do it. It's maybe in other situations, invention is brought about by an image more than a conceptual grasp of a situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as we saw in the previous sections, it can also be like a relatively indeterminate image, like in the discussion of the imago and Lacan. It can be an image that sort of contains without really unifying, at least partially contradictory sub-images or components.
Yeah, so in that case, you had the good mother and the bad mother as sort of two aspects that are contained in this image of the mother that are sort of interacting with each other but are not sort of fully resolved. These sorts of images I think would probably be especially suitable for invention, because this tension that is contained in the image would sort of push towards a resolution. Okay, I think we should stop here. We went a little bit longer than I expected, but that's fine because we had a good discussion. Let's stop here and pick up from there. I should mention, so next week we can meet as usual, but the week after I can't make the meeting, so we'll miss that week just for reference, but I'll remind everyone next week. But yeah, so next week is fine. 2 weeks from now, we'll have to skip the meeting.
By the way, I have to miss next week's meeting.
Okay. So hopefully a few other people will show up. But if not, we can skip that one as well. Thanks for coming out, everyone. Thanks for your contributions, and hope to see most of you next week. And if not, then in 3 weeks.